So the two subdivisions of the peripheral nervous system, you have the somatic and you have the autonomic. So this is the first one. And the somatic nervous system is some of the key things you need to know about it is it controls conscious responses. The cell bodies are located within the CNS, so in the brain or the spinal cord, and you have a motor neuron, but you really just have one motor neuron, and it controls skeletal muscles, which are under voluntary control. And then you have your sensory neurons that receive all kinds of external stimuli. So it's really dealing with responding to the external environment. So they sense the external environment and then control the skeletal muscles. So that is external, voluntary, and it's conscious responses. You have to think about it. Well, after, there are some somatic reflexes that happen where you don't just really think about walking, but you learn it so much that you don't really have to think about it after a while. Autonomic nervous responses or nervous system is going to regulate homeostasis and organ function, and it's predominantly composed of motor neurons, and it's pretty involuntary. So the efferent pathway has two sets of motor neurons. The first is within the cell in the CNS, and the second neuron is in the ganglia. So this would be called the preganglia or preganglionic neuron. Ran out of room. And then the one that's in the ganglia is considered like the postganglionic. So your book doesn't really get into that. You don't have to know that there is that. But so there's a first and a second neuron. So there's two motor neurons in the efferent pathway. Sensory nerve will detect internal body conditions rather than external. And that's why it's, really dealing with stuff internally, like homeostasis and controlling like your body temperature, your blood pressure, your glucose levels, that kind of thing. And so there are chemical and pressure sensors within the body, where your somatic nervous system is going to be feeling like heat from the outside and pressure from the outside and pain from the outside and light from the outside and that kind of thing. So of the autonomic nervous system, then there are two divisions, and I'm going to add this as question number 13 on your study guide if it hasn't already been added, and that is differentiate between the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So essentially, this is what you need to know, is that the sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight response, and it's going to increase your heart rate, increase your breathing, and it's going to relax your airways because you're going to need to run away or you're going to need to fight. And so this is more of the stress is, it's a stress situation and you're responding to a stressful situation. The parasympathetic is the rest or digest response, and so it's going to be slowing the heart rate and it's promoting digestion. And so this is active during restful periods or after a meal. And if you have a lot of stress in your life, you may not digest very well and you may not metabolize very well, and that may cause issues with getting the nutrients that you need and functioning properly. So there's a lot of this issue, this interaction between the stress and the rest and digest response. So you can see the different parts, like the sympathetic nervous system is more of the thoracolumbar, so it's thoracic and lumbar nerves. And the parasympathetic division is going to be more of the cranial, and these two, the sacral nerves. And so it's interesting. There's a lot of differences between these. I am not going to get into too much of the differences because this is an anatomy and physiology class, but I do think, you know, you need to understand the fight or flight. And I think it is interesting that it's the norepinephrine that guides, which is like, it's going to have a similar response as epinephrine. So it's going to be, you know, like adrenaline. It's going to have a real, like, activate everything. And so when one of these in this chain here called the sympathetic chain gets activated, they all get activated, where these are more specific, but there are a lot of organs that are involved. One of the nerves is called the vagus nerve, and it's this one down here, and it goes to the heart, and it also has connections down here near the bladder and the colon. And sometimes you can trigger the heart to slow down when you do not a pelvic exam, but a prostate exam in males when they go in. They use the rectum to go in and test for changes or nodules in the prostate. And in doing so, the vagus nerve does extend far down because it does go all the way, and it innervates the heart, but it also innervates the colon. And so this connection between the colon and the heart, it can actually cause you to pass out. So this is called the vagal reflex. That is not going to be on the test either, but it's just one of those things that I think you kind of should be interested in and knowledgeable of, and there you go. So on, again, just a general look at the different organs. We're going to go through the different organs of the brain, different areas of the brain, and talk about what they do. So here's, again, just a summary showing the forebrain in blue, the red midbrain, and then the kind of fleshy, or, well, I guess that's not a fleshy color because there's different colors of flesh. So the tan color, that is the hindbrain. And the human hindbrain, we'll start there with the cerebellum and the pons and the medulla oblongata. So the cerebellum is what is involved in balance. And so I'm just going to highlight and those are in bold print, the balance and coordinating hand-eye movement. So coordination of movements is there. And they do have some cognitive functions as well, but this is what we're mainly thinking of as the functions of the cerebellum. And for the pons, it's a relay between the cerebellum and the other areas of the brain. So it's a relay, but it's also very much known as the breathing center. So a lot of the nerves that are involved in the breathing and the rate and depth of breathing are going to be here in the pons. So breathing, center of rate and depth, regulating the rate and depth of breathing. The medulla oblongata, then, it's going to control and maintain homeostasis of all these things: the heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, digestion, swallowing, and vomiting. And a lot of this has to do with the cranial nerves that come out of that. But just, you know, one of the big things is controlling the heart rate and the breathing. So part of breathing is in the medulla, and then the other part of breathing and controlling breathing is going on in the pons. So in the midbrain, then you have the tracts that take the information from the pons and send it to different parts of the body. So it processes a lot of these sensory inputs like vision and olfaction and audition, which would be hearing. And the tracts pass the information to the different parts of the brain for processing. So like the visual nerves would run through here and then go to the part of the brain that processes vision, which is the occipital lobe. And hearing, it would go to the temporal lobe. So then the whole brainstem is comprised of the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain. So the hindbrain and the midbrain together, we would consider that the brainstem, although In some textbooks, they also include the diencephalon. So if you look at our brain models, then you take out the brain stem, it does show, and it includes the diencephalon. So, but as far as like it developed from the telencephalon and the diencephalon were part of the forebrain part of the neural tube in embryonic development. But structurally, a lot of people consider the diencephalon part of the brainstem. But anyway, for these three parts, all of these three parts of the brainstem contain nuclei, which are, again, cell bodies in the central nervous system that are going to form the reticular activating system or the reticular formation. And what this is it's going to maintain and control a state of alertness. So it keeps you alert, and it's also where consciousness is involved and sleep. So depending on how much sensory input you're getting, that'll cause you to be more alert. If you have more sensory input, less alert and more unconscious and sleeping because you have less sensory input. So when you close your eyes, you're cutting yourself off from visual inputs. And if you put in earplugs, you're cutting yourself off from hearing. So if you have to sleep during the day, which may not be a normal kind of thing to do, but if you work third shift or whatever and you have to sleep during the day, you might put some mask on your face to keep your sun and light out, and then you might have earplugs in to stop from getting the hearing input so that you can actually sleep. So this reticular formation or reticular activating system is what I also have heard it named and called. This is the part that is going to be, making you stay in a state of alertness. So if you are sleepy and you want to stay awake, then you like crank up the music because that's increasing your sensory input of your, auditory senses. And you may turn on bright lights, to keep you alert and that kind of thing. And the reverse is true. If you want to go to sleep, then you would, cut off the music, the sound, the lights, that kind of thing. And the other part of this is, again, as we mentioned with the medulla and the pons, the medulla has that cardiovascular system regulation and then the respiration controls. So the forebrain is the cerebellum and or cerebrum, and the diencephalon. And the cerebrum consists of the cortex, the cerebral cortex, the basal nuclei, which are deeper, and this limbic system, which is not really a particular organ. It's a combination. It's like an area of the brain, really. So that's the cerebrum. And the diencephalon is the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. And again, this is a nice division here. You can see how the diencephalon is consisting of these three parts, and the cerebrum's these three parts, and the cerebral cortex has these lobes of the brain. So we're going to look at those 6 structures and then the 4 areas of the brain. So in the thalamus, you have a lot of relays for sensory information to the cerebrum. So it receives all these sensory inputs, these sensory axons, myelinated sensory axons, and then it sends outputs from the cerebrum to other parts of the brain. So it has the motor axons going out. So it has relays that are afferent and efferent, so that are sensory and motor. So that it gets inputs from all the sensory systems except for olfaction. So all except for olfaction, because olfaction is coming closer to the nose and it doesn't need to go through the thalamus. That would be going backwards. And then it temporarily filters out some sensory information that's involved in the perception of pain. So you can say you have a headache or something like that and somebody stomps on your foot. Well, that can temporarily stop your headache because now you're thinking about your foot that's throbbing. So that is something else that it can do. The diencephalon now consists of 3 parts. So we're going to start with the hypothalamus. And this is the part that produces hormones that regulate the pituitary gland. So it has both a neural and a endocrine function here. But it controls digestion, reproductive systems. It has some gonadotropin releasing hormone is one of the hormones that is released from the hypothalamus that then causes things to be produced in the pituitary. Body temperature is going to be controlled here. So this is basically your body's thermostat is the hypothalamus. And basic behaviors are going to be controlled out of the hypothalamus. So it has a lot to do with homeostasis of the body and control of behavior. And so it can act as a master clock to establish circadian rhythms. It is also sensitive to the action of other hormones, which is different than other parts of the brain, which are really mostly going to receive input from neurotransmitters. But it's really kind of a quasi-neuro and endocrine system organ, so it can receive signals from other hormones. So the diencephalon now includes the epithalamus, which seems to have a lot of different roles. It's right around the area where the limbic system kind of is located, so it integrates the sensory inputs like olfactory and visual input or visceral inputs, and so coming from your organs, and emotion and memory. And so it does seem to control food and water intake, so hunger and thirst. It also seems to have something to do with rhythmic and seasonal behaviors, and so your physiological and biological clock, basically your circadian rhythms, are set with this, and seems to have something to do with melatonin. Melatonin is there's a lot of controversy or debate about whether melatonin actually is involved, but it is suggested to be involved in controlling your sleep and wake cycle, and it seems to be regulated by the length of light produced, the light period in each day. And so some people have this seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. In the wintertime they get more depressed because of the less light days of light, and that may be related to this. But you have hormonal rhythms and other kinds of things that are regulated here with this cycle as well. So it's behavioral cycles, it's physiological cycles, it's hormonal cycles, all going on during this 24-hour day. That is going to be all in this area of the diencephalon. But sleep, it seems to be more of a melatonin thing, which was produced by the pineal gland.